path at once. Yes, sir. We are moving. Quickly now. Charge for king and country! The Battle of Buxar, a turning point. Here, the fate of empires was sealed. The lines are holding. We must press the advantage. Sing that now! The route is secured. Advance the troops. Yes, sir. Moving up. Your forces are defeated. Surrender now. We yield. The day is yours. Your bravery is noted. Lay down your arm. Steady, pads! Salute the fallen!
Dear viewers, our story begins in the year 1764. The land of Hindustan still believes it is ruled by emperors, nawabs, and kings. The Mughal throne still exists. Its silken banners still flutter in the wind. Its court still whispers of divine right and imperial destiny. But beneath the surface, history is already cracking. Somewhere on the dusty plains near the banks of the Ganges, in a place called Buxar, the fate of an entire subcontinent is about to be rewritten. Not with royal proclamations or sacred oaths, but with gunpowder, betrayal, ambition, and blood. What happens here will not just decide a battle. It will decide who controls India. And the men who win this day will not wear crowns. They will wear coats, carry ledgers, and call themselves a trading company. This is not just a story of soldiers and cannons. This is the story of how India was lost in a single morning, and how British rule became inevitable. This is the Battle of Buxar, the victory that sealed British dominance forever. Before Buxar, the British East India Company was powerful, but it was not yet supreme. It was a merchant enterprise with private armies, surviving in a land ruled by ancient dynasties and powerful regional rulers. Its first major leap came after the Battle of Plassey in 1757, where Robert Clive defeated Siraj ud Daulah through treachery more than tactics. Plassey gave the company influence, money, and confidence, but it did not give them legitimacy. Bengal was still contested, and the idea that a foreign trading corporation could rule India was far from accepted. What the company lacked was final authority, the legal and political right to rule. That authority would be forged not at Plassey, but at Buxar. To understand why Buxar happened, we must understand the chaos of 18th century India. The Mughal Empire, once the greatest power in Asia, was collapsing from within. Emperors were weak, provinces were rebelling, and regional rulers were carving out their own kingdoms. The Nawab of Bengal, the Nawab of Awadh, and even the Mughal emperor himself were locked in constant struggles, against each other and against rising European powers. The British East India Company exploited this fragmentation with ruthless intelligence. They did not conquer India all at once. They absorbed it piece by piece, turning Indian rivals against each other, offering alliances that became traps. By the early 1760s, Mir Qasim, the Nawab of Bengal, realized the truth too late. Installed by the British themselves, he soon discovered that he was nothing more than a puppet. The company drained Bengal's wealth, interfered in administration, and exempted its officials from taxes, destroying the local economy. When Mir Qasim tried to assert independence, reforming his army, removing British privileges, and shifting his capital to Munger, the company responded with force. War broke out. Mir Qasim was defeated and fled, but instead of surrendering, he did something dangerous. He formed a grand alliance. Mir Qasim joined forces with Shuja ud Daulah, the Nawab of Awadh, and Shah Alam II, the Mughal emperor himself. This alliance represented something unprecedented, the old order of India uniting against a foreign power. On paper, this coalition was overwhelming. The Mughal emperor brought legitimacy, Awadh brought resources and cavalry, and Mir Qasim brought experience and fury. Together, they commanded nearly 40,000 men. Facing them was a much smaller force, around 7,000 troops of the British East India Company under Major Hector Munro. And yet, history would not be decided by numbers alone. The battlefield of Buxar was deceptively quiet. Flat plains, open ground, and the slow-moving Ganges nearby. No dramatic hills, no natural fortifications. Just open land where discipline would matter more than bravery. On the morning of October 22, 1764, the Allied Indian forces believed victory was certain. They had the emperor. They had numbers. They believed the British were overextended traders who had overreached. What they did not understand was that the company's army was no longer a merchant guard. It was a modern, professional, European-style force trained for precision warfare. Major Hector Monroe was not a flamboyant general, but he was brutally effective. His troops were drilled relentlessly, his artillery was well coordinated, and his command structure was tight. The Indian alliance, by contrast, suffered from divided leadership, mistrust, and outdated tactics. The Mughal army still relied heavily on cavalry charges and personal valor, methods that had once conquered empires but now crumbled against disciplined musket fire and artillery. As the battle began, the Indian forces launched aggressive cavalry attacks, hoping to overwhelm the British lines. But Monroe's troops held their ground. Muskets fired in synchronized volleys. Cannons tore through advancing ranks. Every charge was met with deadly precision. Slowly, methodically, the company army dismantled the much larger force facing them. The battlefield became a slaughterhouse, not because the Indians lacked courage, but because courage alone could no longer win wars. One of the most tragic aspects of Buxar was betrayal and confusion within the Indian camp.
Mia Kasim distrostit Shuya ul Dawla.
Shuji-ud-Dawla feared the Mughal emperor's intentions. Orders were delayed, formations broke, and morale collapsed. At a critical moment, parts of the Allied army retreated prematurely, believing the battle lost. That moment sealed their fate. Within hours, the alliance disintegrated. By afternoon, the British stood victorious. The defeat was catastrophic. Thousands lay dead. The Mughal emperor fled the battlefield, stripped of authority and dignity. Shuji-ud-Dawla's army collapsed, and Mir Qasim vanished into obscurity, his dreams of resistance crushed forever. But the real significance of Buxar was not military, it was political. After the battle, Shah Alam II had no choice. He surrendered to the British East India Company, and in 1765, he signed the Treaty of Allahabad, one of the most important documents in Indian history. With a single signature, the Mughal emperor granted the company the Diwani rights, the right to collect revenue, in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This was the moment India truly fell under British control. The company was no longer just a power behind the throne. It became the ruler, in law and in fact. This revenue transformed the company overnight. Bengal's wealth funded British armies, expanded their influence, and financed further conquests across India. Indian money paid for Indian subjugation. The company now had legitimacy, resources, and military dominance. Every future British victory, from Mysore to the Marathas, can be traced back to Buxar. Plassey gave the British opportunity. Buxar gave them India. The aftermath was devastating for the Indian population. Revenue extraction intensified. Traditional industries collapsed. Famines followed, including the horrific Bengal famine of 1770. The British did not see themselves as rulers responsible for welfare. They saw themselves as shareholders maximizing profit. India was no longer a civilization to govern. It was a balance sheet to exploit. What makes the Battle of Buxar especially tragic is that it was perhaps the last real chance for Indian powers to unite against colonial domination. After Buxar, resistance continued, but never again with such symbolic unity. The Mughal emperor became a pensioner of the company. Indian rulers became dependents or enemies doomed to fall. The psychological defeat was as powerful as the military one. Buxar also changed warfare in India forever. Traditional armies were rendered obsolete. European drill, discipline, and artillery became the standard. Indian rulers scrambled to modernize, but it was too late. The company had a head start, unlimited resources, and the backing of a global empire. Today, Buxar is barely remembered outside history books. There are no grand monuments, no national commemorations matching its importance. Yet its impact was greater than almost any battle fought on Indian soil. It did not just change who ruled India, it changed how India would be ruled for nearly 2 centuries. The Battle of Buxar teaches a brutal lesson about power, unity, and adaptation. Empires do not fall only because of foreign invasions. They fall when internal divisions make resistance impossible. Buxar was not just a British victory. It was an Indian failure of unity at a critical moment. And so, on that dusty plain in 1764, as the smoke cleared and the cannons fell silent, India's fate was sealed. A trading company became a ruler. An emperor became a symbol. And a civilization entered one of the darkest chapters of its history. not with a dramatic collapse, but with a quiet signature on a treaty written in a foreign language. The Battle of Buxar was not the end of India, but it was the end of Indian sovereignty. And the echoes of that single day still shape the world we live in today.